So you'll want to log in. It's manage.windowsazure.com. Make sure you log in. I think you'll arrive here at the home screen that says all items. And if you click on SQL databases, I think with our passes we get access to 2. So what I think will be the simplest is just to create one database on here and maybe call it COMP2007. So I'm going to create a blank database. I'm going to call mine COMP2007. And under the server, I'm going to choose New SQL Database Server. And then I'll click the Next button. I suggest for your login name, use GC and your student number. And you create a password for the database. So in effect, you're playing server administrator, so put the password somewhere, put it in your email, send yourself a note, because if you forget the password, you're going to lock yourselves out. I have no access to reset these. Okay, you're setting up your own database and your own credentials.
Mine looks a little different from yours. Specify database settings.
I'm going to pick North Central US, which is probably the closest to us. And when we're done, it should create the database. You'll notice at the bottom, there will be an option to open it in Visual Studio. So you actually can use Visual Studio to access your databases directly. It does work. I'll show you how to do it. Some of you may like having everything inside of Visual Studio. Personally, I prefer to use the SQL Server Management Studio instead because it's just much more robust. There's a lot more functionality within Management Studio. For doing basic tasks, we can do it in Visual Studio. So it's maximum 250 gig database.
Why do they make you use such crazy passwords? Can't they just recommend it?
They're trying to save you from yourself, I guess.
Rich, in Tom's class, we're building virtual studio virtual machine.
Yep.
Now, am I going to have enough pass money to do both courses?
If you don't, I can give you another pass. Okay. So it says my database is online. So if I click on it, here's the server name. And if I choose View SQL Database Connection Strings, we can it'll actually show us. So here's, for example, an ADO.NET connection string.
Oh, PHP.
Yep, so we can connect through PHP, through Java, through ODBC. We've got all of these options. Here's the other thing. By default, actually, you'll all need to do this. Once your database is set up, I'll just go back. So click on your database, scroll down. By default, the SQL Server database is not designed to allow remote connections. Meaning if we created a website and hosted it on Azure, our website can see it, but as we're working locally, or if we want to interact from Management Studio to our database, by default, it doesn't allow remote connections. So we can allow that. So if we click on Set up Windows Azure Firewall Rules for this IP address. Now, if you're on a laptop when you go home, if you want to connect from home, you're going to have to add your IP from home. So as soon as I click it, it says your current IP is not included in the firewall rules. Do you want to update the firewall rules to allow this IP? So I'll say yes. So if I don't enable that, when we try connecting from Visual Studio or Management Studio, we're going to get blocked. So now if I click it, yeah, it tells me I'm already set up with my IP. If you're on the wireless network, your IP will be end in .2, the last subnet will be 2.9. If your machine's wired, it'll be .30. That'll be consistent at the college. Those external IPs won't change. We also have the ability to export straight out of the Azure panel. If we have an existing database, and let's say we want to take a copy and move it to another server, or move it locally, or share it with another developer, we can just do an export straight from here. So now let's open up, I can go in here. So there's a bunch of tools here. You know, we can set up security, auditing, we can enable. Geo-replication, anybody know what database replication is? Ever heard that term?
Oh, you can replicate under different servers.
That's right. We could take that database and have it replicated on different servers on a sync schedule. So that way if one server goes offline, yep, it's like real time.
My question is, do they have dedicated developers for loading screens at Microsoft? They have lots of loading screens. Oh,
yeah, they do. So here's our, so you'll need to copy your server name. So again, you can get this if you just go to the dashboard down here on the right. Here's your server name. So we'll need this in order to be able to connect through Visual Studio or through Management Studio. So you might just want to copy that server name to the clipboard. Just copy that. And now we'll try connecting through Management Studio. So if you're on a lab computer, Management Studio is inside of Programs, Computer Studies, SQL Server 2008. You'll find Management Studio there. If you've installed it on your own machine, it'll appear somewhere in your Programs menu. So what we want is SQL Server Management Studio. So when you open that up, the first thing you're going to get is a connection prompt. So what server do you want to connect to? So copy in your server address on Azure. Now there's two options for authentication. If you're connecting to a server that's on your wired network, then you can actually, if the server's set up for Windows authentication, you can actually just choose Windows authentication and log in using your network credentials. That isn't going to work, obviously, if we're connecting remotely.
Where do we find the server name? Where did you find that?
Yep, so go back to your dashboard. I'll just go back here. So I'll go all the way back out. Ben, so click on the database name and click on dashboard, and here's the server name here. So you'll need that value. And then enter your database credentials that you set up. And you may as well have it. It will save your password. If you're on your own machine, you won't have to enter it every time. And if we choose connect,
Loading screen. This is a very nice loading screen.
Excellent.
Network related instance specific error.
provided network name is no longer.
Yeah, I got that. But I got it. But they have an error message too.
I wish they spicy error message though.
Yeah. Or like into specific, extremely volatile memory affecting memory affecting allocation error. DCL.
So I'm on the wired network. I'm going to maybe try on the wireless and see if it's any different.
DCL error. The port's probably blocked. Any money?
Well,
Any money?
I spent a lot of time with IT having them open the ports for this before, but they may have closed them.
Yeah, because they block every port except for 80. Might as well just,
Has anybody tried on the wireless net? If you're on wireless,
I think
do you get the same?
I'm
Still creating it?
Yeah, about that.
It's just.
Same error.
Same error. Okay.
Well, then nothing else we can do. Oh well.
Okay. That's okay. We've got a workaround for today.
Hack the system. What's the workaround? Gauge casing. There we go. That's magic. We can't get to the
We're going to try this way. Notice it's got my server name here as a link. If I go back to my main database screen, I'm going to click on that link, open it in a new tab. We'll see if I can get into manage our database this way.
What's your favorite browser?
Yeah, I use Firefox. Okay, that just took me back to the same place. So no, we don't want to do that. This is what the Management Studio interface looks like. So we can connect to multiple servers. Let's say we're working on applications that are hosted on different servers. We can register and set up each server here so that our credentials get remembered. And then within any server, we can select it and we can see a list of databases that are here. So we can create databases, we can import or export data. It has a query editor here, much like my SQL Workbench. It has some other tools in here that are pretty neat that we can kind of poke around with. Yeah, this is my own local server. I'm not on the lab machine, I'm on my laptop. So I've set up a few in the past.
Is there a newer version of the software? This is 2008, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep, there are newer versions. This is 2008. So what we want to do is create a new, we'll just create a new database locally. So all I need to do is click on databases, right click, choose new database. So I'll just create a COMP2007 database. And what it does is it actually creates two physical files. The data file will have an MDF extension, and there will be a log file that will have an LDF extension. So I'll just click OK. Right click on databases and choose new.
Oh, man. I would do like file. Oh, Sam.
So in order to see it, you might need to click the refresh link. When it was done creating, it didn't show up here until I clicked refresh. If you're on a lab computer, this database is obviously not going to persist next week, so we'll need to set it up again, or once we can get the Azure port problem sorted out, we'll just post it on Azure and then it'll be there permanently.
Is this like a hard thing to get installed on a local machine? No software?
No, it takes a while because it's big,
Yeah.
but no, it's pretty easy. Just the whole key is when you set it up, you can accept all of the defaults, except it'll prompt you for the password for the user SA. Make sure you make a note of that password and you don't forget it, because you'll need it.
Yeah.
Whenever you open Management Studio and in all your connection strings in your applications, you'll need that credential. So you can set it up yourself, just don't forget the password. So here's what we get. When I create a new database, if I expand it, we can create tables. We also can create views, so queries that we want to store, so we don't have to rerun the same SQL query each time. Programmability would be things for like stored procedures, functions, and triggers. So all of this stuff is baked right in to Visual Studio. We also can set up security, so roles and permissions, security keys, etc. for any database, and we can set up database diagrams, so we want to create an ERD for part of our solution. All of that can get done and stored in Management Studio. There are some other neat tools in here. I'll show you one of the best ones in a minute. So we've got this empty database. There are no tables here. I've given you a really short script on Blackboard. So if you can go into the folder for today, I know there's a whole lot of stuff on here. Right down at the bottom, there's an SQL script, just called students.sql. So just grab that, copy that to the clipboard. And to run that, if we just click on New Query, notice at the top when I click New Query, by default, it defaults to our master database. We want to change this to our COMP2007 database. Yeah, or you could right-click and say New Query that way. Yep. So I'm going to paste in the script. And there's a few things I want to look at with you.
Mr. Ralph Fubar.
Okay. So a few differences, a few things that are similar and some that are different from working with MySQL. SQL, sorry? In the Lesson 4 folder. Course Documents, Lesson 4. Right down at the bottom. It says students.sql. Okay. What do you notice? There's one or two things here that will be different from what you will have seen with a MySQL database. Actually, there's really only one thing different.
No braces? Or brackets, rather?
Look at the date format.
Oh, wait, never mind.
You put up your hand to say, I don't know?
Something like that.
Okay. Sam?
I'm thinking maybe the date format.
No.
No.
There's one thing that's different.
Identity, primary key.
You just spin everything on the screen or something?
Spit no things to see that are unique.
That's the difference, right? What's the term, what do you use in MySQL for getting it to automatically seed the database, the IDs? The keyword is not identity.
Auto-increment.
Right. So in MySQL you use auto increment. In SQL Server the keyword is identity instead. So SQL Server, about 90–95% of your SQL commands are the same, but the version SQL Server uses is called TSQL, stands for Transact SQL. So there are a few commands that are different. For example, if you only wanted to select 3 records in a query in MySQL, you'd use the limit function at the end, right? Select star from students, limit 3. Here what you would use in TSQL is you would use a command select top 3 star from students. So there's a few little differences. The documentation is good. If you go into help, the index, the documentation is very thorough.
Is there a chance there maybe might be like a tool online where you can take your MySQL and convert it to SQL?
Probably. Have never looked for one, but yeah, I bet you that there probably is. Okay. The other great thing about SQL Server, it is not case sensitive.
Nice.
So I can create my table this way, and I could run my insert this way. If I did this in MySQL, it's gonna, well, if I did it in MySQL on Windows, it will work.
Oh, no.
But if you do it on Linux, and typically MySQL is running on an Apache server which runs Linux, then my insert's gonna crash. We also get, much like in Visual Studio, we get the code prompts in IntelliSense. We get them in Management Studio in the query editor. So right here, it's prompting me with students. So if I type students dot, right, it finds the columns. So it's got the intelligent code editing and code hinting, so we're less likely to mistype something. Also saves us typing and saves us time. So what we want to do, the other thing we can do before we actually run the query, so if I make an error, there's a check syntax button so it can parse. Well, actually it tells me that's okay. We'll take that. No, there's no compilation. Right? So if I want to check my queries before I run them, here you go. So on line 14, you've got a syntax error. That's a great question, Jesse. How the heck do we turn on the line numbers?
Just like in Visual Studio.
Oh, it is in
It must be made by Microsoft.
It may be under the
Text editor.
text editor, transact SQL. There we go.
Plain text has display line number.
So you can also turn on or turn off the IntelliSense, so the code hints. I don't know why you'd want to turn them off, really. There we go. Right? So this is handy. So if I want to execute, it'll give us our output. So now how do we know that it worked? Well, we can either, so now we can just run a query. So if I just want to execute my select, because we've already run the create and insert, I can execute that query. It gives me the results. Now there's some cool features in here. So let's say I want to take that query result. Right now, this option, normally when you run a query, it gives you the results in the grid down below. But there's a few other options here. If I want to send that query result directly to a file, or sorry, to text, if I execute it again, it'll give me raw text. If I execute it to a file, it'll let me save it as an RPT file.
When it's saving it to the actual database, is it in like, just like, what is the format that it's saving?
The actual database extension is MDF. It's a proprietary, it's Microsoft data format,
Okay.
basically.
And is it like,
At least I think that's what it
if you were
stands
to
for.
open that file, what would you see, like just ones and
I'm
zeros?
curious if it looks exactly like this text or if they just put an arbitrary.
You would no, you wouldn't be able to. We can try and, well, we can try that. It's a fair question. If we go in and open it up, so here's the default location for my data.
I think that's when that might be 90.
I think it's 10.
How would you know that?
Choking, I don't know.
I think it's in
I feel like it would be hidden in like,
No.
lab data or something like
What would it be?
Hang on, it may not be in.
Just see where when you create the database.
Yeah, I could go into the settings, which would be easier than searching, right? If I want to see the properties.
So it's in.
So I go into the properties, the files. It's here. Program files. I was going into the x86 version.
Yes. Does that mean you have 32-bit Windows?
that.
No. So SQL Server.
An x86 one is running a 64-bit system.
So it's in here
The other one is for that.
Okay, so program files.
and
On a
data.
32-bit system, it's 32-bit only programs. program files on a 64-bit system is 64-bit system. And then program files can x86 and 64-bit system are 32-bit.
That is secure program.
So here's my COMP2007. Here's the MDF. I can try and open it with a text editor.
You're definitely running 32-bit numbers. I feel for you.
Excellent to know.
Yeah. There's nothing, you can't open it. Text file, text editor doesn't read
Won't
anything.
even open it up and like, bring there.
Nope.
Really depressing. Hoping to see a lot of that.
Open it up and put it out. It's just, I know it's
That's sick.
Just open a huge query window, let's query it.
Yeah.
Just open it.
Nope.
So there are a number of other powerful tools here. So we can send to text. I'll send it back to the grid. Whoops. It also has, I can turn on my query execution plan. So here's my estimated and here's my actual. This is incredibly helpful. So when I run it, I get my results, but it also shows me, let's say I'm running a query with multiple tables and joins, it tells me the resource breakdown for every part of my query. So if I'm running a complicated query and my page is slow, we can use this to identify bottlenecks. So it says the actual, all the resource was resolved around that primary key index. That used 100% of the resources to run the query. So this is awesome for doing performance tuning and performance optimization. Because eventually in real world applications, we write really complex queries and we can figure out how can we modify or tweak those to get performance gains out of them. We also can do things like if I want to back up my database. So if I want to take a backup, so let's say I'm working locally, this is what I would have to do. If I'm building an application locally, now I want to deploy it to a server, right? So how do I take my local database? So I right click, choose tasks and backup. I'm going to make a full database. By default, it saves them here. So inside of my MS SQL, there's a backup folder. So I'll go into that. It gives it a .bak extension.
You put custom sounds on those, sir? Sure did.
Yes, because I have nothing better to do with my time.
I have a question. I asked this question before. You never answered it. You just
Sorry.
putting the dot in your domain, does that mean use the current domain or what? When you logged in there. You put a dot slash, did you log in?
I think that's one back.
No, that's the computer name. That's the computer name. The college gave it. That's the computer name. Right. So if I back it up, it runs pretty quickly. I can say append to an existing backup or overwrite the existing backup. So now I have a BAK file. So here's my backup. So it took my 2 meg database, it shrunk it down, so it compresses it. And then I would go into a hosting control panel if I wanted to create a new database or I wanted to restore. Basically, I'd upload that through FTP, and then I should be able to go in and restore.
Let's see hosting.
And most hosts will give you the ability to create backups, but basically that's what they're running. So I'd upload that file. So if I wanted to go in and restore that to a server, I could go in and say, if I chose database import, it would let me browse to the BAK file that I've uploaded on the server, and then it will copy that online. So that's how I could work locally to develop, and when I was ready to deploy online, I would take a BAK and then upload that to the server, and now my database is copied to a web host. We also can do things like import and export. So if I choose tasks, I want to export some data. Let's say somebody wants our student record as an Excel file. So where am I coming from? I'm coming from my local server from COMP2007.
Oh.
Okay, I guess I better log in.
That's like the sounds are original. Yeah. Is this a college laptop or your personal laptop?
College laptop. So now it's saying, where do you want to send it to? Do you want to export directly to another SQL Server database that you have credentials for? Do you want to dump it to Oracle? or Excel access. Do you want to dump it into a CSV file? And then I can just browse, save the file, it'll copy and dump it. So there's a lot of functionality here.
Scroll down, does it say LDAP?
Yep. Well, there's online.
ODB.
Never mind, that's an LDAP.
Export to LDAP.
Put it on my
So I could send. So we use this import-export wizard often because many times we'll have to work, somebody will want a third-party source of data that's available, say, in a text file, and we'll want to bring it in and include it as part of our database table. So we can use this wizard for importing and exporting.
I'm not a wizard. I'm just there.
So now in Visual Studio, what we can do, actually, I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to close my little tip calculator. I'm going to make a new project. I don't think we'll have time to get into we're not going to have time to get into Entity Framework today. It's not really something I can do justice in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So actually, you know what? I'm just going to open that other solution back up. I'll show you how we can connect through Visual Studio in and see our database. So all I have to do is go over to Server Explorer. And under, well, when our port is open, we can connect straight to Azure from here.
That'd be
You'll be able to do it from home. But what you have to do first is go back into your database on Azure and allow this IP in through the firewall. And then you'll be able to connect to Azure through here. Ben, question?
Connected to Azure on my Visual Studio already.
Are you on Wi-Fi?
Yeah.
It's on Wi-Fi.
For the database or for the web app?
It shows my database already there.
Okay, good.
Wi-Fi ports aren't blocked, I don't think.
So if I click Add Connection,
Then you have all the answers.
I do actually.
now I can log on to my server.
I signed in right from the Azure tab.
Okay, that makes sense.
There you go.
So I can add that with my login, and now we can access the database straight through here. So we can look at the tables if we want to browse the data, or make changes, write queries, write stored procedures. You can do all that stuff straight through Visual Studio. It doesn't have quite as much functionality, though, as Management Studio does. So I don't tend to do this through Management Studio. I usually will open both windows. And when I want to work in the database, I'll typically go here. Nope, it's basically just another window into the same thing. So you can go into it either way, whatever you prefer. Yep, so I just wrote the query. Yep, so all you do is add it to the server, add the server connection into Server Explorer. So to write a query, you would basically either just view the table, but if you wanted to filter it, you'd create a view. So if I choose new query, I'll get the query window. So I can run it, and I can execute it. So you can do it right here. It doesn't have some of the more advanced features. It does actually show the execution plan. Yep, not case sensitive. So if I run it that way, doesn't matter. The execution plan's here. So this is kind of like Management Studio Lite. So if you like the idea of having it all within Visual Studio, by all means use this. I find that I'm often doing additional things in there, and I'm just kind of used to the Management Studio interface, so I tend to use that. But you can do either. And if you're on your own machine, once you save the connection, you only have to put in those credentials every time you open Visual Studio. That connection will just live inside the Server Explorer, and you can access it anytime. Which is kind of nice.
Right now.
So I think what we're going to do, we'll actually call it a day here. Okay. What we'll do next week is, well, first of all, we'll try and get this sorted out to make sure we can get connected through to Azure. And what we'll do is I'll give you, we can either work with this database or I'll give with this one table. We'll recreate this on Azure, or I might give you a more fully fleshed out version, and we'll start looking at entity framework and looking at some of this stuff. We'll start looking at some of this stuff. How does our .NET application, now that we know how SQL Server is set up, what the interface looks like, how does our .NET app talk to it? What's the entity framework about? I'm going to make this available. I would strongly, entity framework is a really, really, really different way of doing data access from anything you've seen before. Okay? So there's a short tutorial from Microsoft. It's kind of a video walkthrough. It's 7 minutes. This is 5. We'll probably use 6. It'd be a really good idea to go through that before next week, just so you get some idea of what any framework is all about. There's also tons of tutorials on the .NET site, so you may want to have a look, and we'll start working through some of that stuff next week. Okay, your assignments are due next Tuesday night. Have a good week. I will put